Okay, we're going to start. Welcome everybody to the Indie Reads Summer Book Club Author Talk with Grace Chan. I'm sure that many of you are aware you're, unable to avoid the fact that today is Valentine's Day, but just as relevant to us is the fact that it's Library Lovers Day as well. So I would like to welcome you all and wish everybody a happy Library Lovers Day. I know that people will be joining us from across New South Wales and in Grace's case, beyond. She's in Melbourne. And I would like to acknowledge that the State Library is on the traditional land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge any Indigenous and First Nations people who are joining us this evening for this online chat. My name is Phillipa McGuinness. I work here at the State Library of New South Wales. I'm the proud editor of the library's magazine Openbook, and I also happen to be a writer myself, not of speculative fiction like our wonderful author Grace, but non-fiction. And I really have always enjoyed reading fiction, including speculative fiction, and I know that we're going to have a wonderful chat tonight. But before I introduce you to our author, who has produced a smart, vivid, and super compelling work, as I'm sure all you book clubbers are well aware, I'll just tell you a little bit about Indie Reads. Indie Reads is an ebook and audiobook platform that has been developed by the State Library of New South Wales for the New South Wales Public Library Network. One of the main aims behind the Indie Reads initiative is to provide public library members with access to the very best titles from independent Australian publishers and to showcase new Australian authors. Without question, this year's Summer Book Club offering, Grace's debut novel, Every Version of You, which is published by Affirm Press, fits that bill. And in case any of you haven't seen the physical book, I thought I would just quickly hold it up for you. And I was not one bit surprised to hear that this year's Summer Book Club has been a really wonderful success, with thousands of new borrowers signing up to the Indie Reads platform to read Every Version of You and explore the other titles in the collection. So tonight, we're going to have a really terrific conversation about this book. I guess we'll try not to give too many spoilers away for those of you who haven't quite finished the book or are yet to launch in. But before I introduce Grace, let me thank Affirm Press, her publisher, and Grace herself for partnering with the State Library to further the aims of this great initiative that is Indie Reads. So now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Grace Chan. She is, as you will have gathered, a speculative fiction writer, and she's also a doctor. And those are two job descriptors that I imagine appear together in author bios more often than we might expect. Grace works in psychiatry, and anyone who reads her provocative, engaging, extremely accomplished novel won't be surprised to learn of her interest in the brain, the mind, consciousness, neuroscience, and one of the great philosophical and ethical issues that humans have grappled with for centuries, the link between the mind and the body. Every Version of Me is her first novel. I hope it won't be her last, but she has published before short fiction in journals including Going Down Swimming, Aurealis, and elsewhere. So usually if we were all in the same room together, we would all give a little clap to Grace and welcome her. Let's do it anyway. Welcome, Grace, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Philippa, for such a kind introduction. And honestly, I'm just still feeling so lucky to be part of the Indie Reads Book Club and to have every version of you as the summer book club read. Like, it's still a bit surreal that it's out there in everyone's hands. So thank you, everyone, for coming along tonight and joining us for this chat. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. So just so people know what lies ahead, we'll probably chat for 45 minutes or so, including a point where I'll ask Grace to read at least one passage from her book. And there'll be a time for a few questions at the end, which you can type and I'll read out. But let's launch into the nitty-gritty of this book. So we meet the novel's protagonist, Tao Yi Ling, who is a 30-something woman who lives in Melbourne, when she's at a New Year's Eve party at the beach, hanging out with her friends and her partner, Naveen. So that all sounds pretty standard, but we learn in the very first paragraph, I think, that scenario isn't quite what it seems. The first big clue is that the sky is pixelated. It's the late 20th century. And Tao Yi's beach party is happening in a world called Gaia. The real world, ravaged by climate change, does have beaches that are unswimmable. So Grace, can you tell us about these worlds that our heroine and those around her find themselves in? Gaia and the real world.
Yeah, so two very different worlds, and this is sort of set in the late 21st century, so thinking 2 generations from now. And actually, when I first drafted this novel, I set it further into the future, but as I was writing it, I decided no, I had to reel it back and bring it a bit closer to the present day, just because of how the story was unfolding. It just felt a little bit closer to today. So it's 2 generations from now. The world of Gaia, I had a lot of fun world building. That's one of my, the one aspect of writing that I really enjoy. And so I invented I thought about how virtual reality might evolve over the next few decades, and used a lot of, took my artistic liberties and thought about how at the moment, there's so many different companies developing virtual reality worlds for different purposes, for work, for leisure. You have Facebook developing Meta, you have a whole bunch of other competitors trying to get in on the game. And I imagine that maybe, a generation from now, this huge merger between a neuroscience company called Neuronetica and a corporation called Somnus might form this company called Neuronetica Somnus and develop a very vast, sleek, pretty, beautiful, immersive virtual reality world called Gaia. And this might just over time, this just becomes the place where people they log on, and the way that they log on changes with time as well as the technology advances. So at first it's gel caps over their heads to give them the immersive experience of Gaia. And later on, as you'll see in the novel, it becomes a pod filled with neuroconductive gel for people's bodies. So as the technology advances with each iteration, and the world advances too. And so this big virtual world called Gaia kind of subsumes all the smaller worlds and builds massive virtual reality world where people socialize, they go out to restaurants, they go shopping, they go to art galleries, they eat and they have sex, and everything that feels interactive and real about their world now takes place in Gaia.
Yeah. And what's happening back in the real world, the world that they're getting into their neuropods to perhaps escape from?
Yeah, so I guess, the most of the book takes place in Australia, in Melbourne specifically. And I, that was a definite choice of mine. I live in Melbourne and I really wanted, there was no other place I was going to set it.
Yeah.
I wanted to write about the city, the place that I live. And it's bleak. I mean, it's quite ravaged by climate change and inaction over the years. And, the Yarra's dried up. To go outside, you have to wear pieces of protective gear, a protective jacket, goggles, gloves, and boots because the temperatures are high. There's things in the air like viruses and radiation from outdoors is quite high as well. So people really do have retreated from the physical world. And Tao Yi expresses at one point in the novel, she works as a tour guide, so she takes people on tours to natural environments like the Great Barrier Reef and Uluru. And she expresses some sadness about the state of those once vibrant natural environments. So it's the physical world is quite changed from today's.
Yeah, I think you're right when you talk about the physical world as being quite bleak in many ways. And I think that we've all had moments, where in Sydney, because of bushfires, we couldn't breathe the air. We have inklings of possible futures, which perhaps aren't so rosy. But the other thing that struck me, and you've touched on this, is the way in which so much of the technology is so relatable as well. I mean, it's only in the past couple of weeks that AI with, what's it called, Snap GPT or Chat GPT has, taken over the headlines as, perhaps a path to a glorious future. But I would suspect that anyone reading this book might look at that, at virtual reality, at the, ubiquity of social media that pans out in your book and think, maybe that's not such a glorious path. A lot of speculative fiction is dystopian. Do you see your book as being dystopian in that way?
I don't think so. I mean, I know it has been called a dystopia, and I think in many ways it is, but I feel like it's not just a dystopia, if that makes sense. So,
oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a kind of leading question because I think it's very nuanced.
I definitely didn't set out to write something bleak and completely dystopic. I guess I just wanted to, I was just playing with, I guess, what I saw in terms of both technology and how we're kind of using technology today around us, how we kind of use technology to escape sometimes from our, what's happening around us. We use technology to explore different parts of ourselves. So we jump online and we can look different and sound different and explore different personas, be different people. And I guess I was just kind of extrapolating, if the world is so ravaged, virtual reality could in a way become an escape and a way to deny maybe what's happening in the world around us. And what would that world look like if we just kind of kept going with the things that we're doing today without kind of thinking more consciously and taking a different direction? That makes the book sound very serious, but at the heart of it, I was also just thinking about, the whole virtual reality and uploading a mind and the fun aspects of virtual reality.
No, it is really playful and at times quite seductive. But at this point, and not only because it's Valentine's Day, I want to, reassure people who haven't read the book and remind those who have that at its core, I think, are relationships. So there's a romantic relationship really at the center of the book, a beautiful partnership between Tao Yi and Naveen, as we've mentioned. And to me, it seemed very fitting that they met before Gaia. And there's a wonderful description of them queuing up to buy their Gaia kit and their pods and
their Gaia gear.
Yeah, in the way that people would queue up for a new smartphone or whatever. To me, that seemed very, very real. And there's also in that relationship, one of the central themes of the book. There's a line where you write, her love for Naveen is embodied, as though every thread of her leans achingly towards him. And I just, quite early on in the book, I thought, oh, they have this kind of visceral, physical connection, perhaps even when they're not in Gaia. And we'll talk more about how that plays out. But I thought readers might like to hear you read about their first experience of Gaia, which is on page 21, if you don't mind turning and to that page and sharing it with us.
Yeah, of course. So this is a scene from just the second chapter, when Tao Yi and Naveen have brought the new iteration of Gaia technology into their cramped little apartment.
Yeah.
They're getting ready to give it a go. Tao Yi and Naveen skimmed their scalps, undressed completely, and took their revisions off. Tao Yi helped Naveen into his new pod first. He winced as he lay down, pressing one arm close to his side over his puckered scar. She bent over and kissed it, getting a bit of goo on her lips. She wiped her mouth. Comfy? Naveen made an okay sign, brushed his hand mischievously around the curve of her breast, and closed his eyes. Within a few seconds, he was gone. She watched his eyelids rolling and twitching for a while, heavy-hearted. Then she turned, holding her arms around her bare tummy. Something gleamed from the shadowy depths of her new pod. She stepped closer and peered in, but it must have just been a fragment of refracted light. Sensing her presence, the machine hummed and came aglow. Tao Yi lifted her leg over the edge of the pod and, swallowing her misgivings, plunged in. It wasn't watery as she'd imagined. It felt like stepping into synthetic foam, like a unified entity shifting aside to make space for her form, hollowing itself out and then remolding to her contours. Gingerly, she lay back. She felt a tickling sensation, tiny particles crawling up her neck and over her scalp. She wasn't lying on the base of the pod, but suspended in the middle of it. The new gel was on every inch of her, creeping across her skin into the creases of her armpits, the folds of her groin. Only her nose and mouth peeked above the surface, allowing her to breathe. An alien warmth spread from her mons pubis up to her belly button. A lush voice beamed directly into her brain. In Gaia, all things are possible.
And we thank you very much for that, Grace. We discover as the book goes on that yes, that's true, and no, in another way, it's not. So let's talk about Naveen. And one of the really moving and I think very insightful parts of the book have to do with bodies that fail, bodies that stop working, and the technology that exists to deal with this. And readers will recall that Naveen is in near constant pain. His kidneys don't work and he has to undergo regular cleaning from a robot, by a robot, with a robot called Trevor. And it seemed to me that in some ways, just as the world had really failed to deal with climate change, the world hadn't really managed to deal with healthcare either, which I think is a really interesting part of the book. So I'd like, if you can, to talk about two things. The fact that it makes sense that perhaps people in Naveen's position might want to live outside their bodies because they're in pain, and why, with all this technology, has the medical system been unable to deal with that?
Yeah. Oh gosh, big questions. Yeah. I had a lot of fun crafting Naveen's character. I think one of the things about the book was that I wanted readers to understand both Tao Yi and Naveen's choices, and that they would feel inevitable for each of the characters in the end. And I think journeying with Naveen through his illness from an early age, from when he's quite a young man, I think you can really feel how much he yearns to return to the freedom of his youth. So he's quite an idealistic, he's an idealistic, sensitive sort of young man.
Yeah.
When he goes into Gaia, it allows him freedom from pain and from his illness, and allows him to pursue a lot of the interests that he can't pursue as easily in the physical world. And there's a lot of unspoken grief, I think, about Naveen's losses in the book. There's quite a few flashback scenes where you see Tao Yi accompanying Naveen as he goes for several procedures. So the kidney replacement procedure, where his organic kidneys are replaced by mechanical kidneys, becomes a little bit of a cyborg in a way.
Yeah.
And the surgery doesn't go as they'd hoped. And that's so rife with emotions for both of them. Tao Yi's racked with guilt, given that she played a role in where he was having the surgery. And Naveen, he's only 19 or 20 when he has the surgery, and there's so much loss. He loses. I think, when you have an illness and you spend a lot of time in hospital, there's so much grief and loss, and it impacts on the changes to your body, sort of inevitably impact on your sense of self. And so that was Naveen's journey. And so, I guess the possibilities of Gaia were wonderful for him. He could have a new body. He could have space to be free of pain, to pursue the things that really gave him joy.
Yeah.
That was the first, I think that was the first part of your question.
No, it was, and you've answered it beautifully, and, reminded all of us how wonderfully drawn these characters are. They feel like real people, fully rounded humans. And his decision does make sense. But I did have the sense that the medical system had failed him. And I guess I wondered if your own experience working within that system informed that, because often we imagine that technology in medicine will cure everything. We will be able to, use 3D printing or whatever it may be to replace our organs. But that it seems, in the world that you have built in this book, that's not the case.
Yeah, I guess I portray medical technology in a few different ways in the novel. And again, I didn't want to be completely black and white about it. I wasn't, I say, medical technology, the advancement of medical technology is in this way is going to be all terrible, and it's going to be, horrible and impersonal. But I guess there were elements like Naveen goes for surgery and it's done by robots, and afterwards he's cared for by a machine called a Teresa, which has a medical AI mind. So the Teresa has kind of become the doctor of the day.
Yeah.
But at the same time, fast forwarding towards the later parts of the novel where Tao Yi visits her mother Xin Yi in a nursing home, the droids there are the nurses, and I guess I wanted to portray them with compassion as well. They are carers, and I didn't want to portray them as being unfeeling or completely devoid of care and compassion and empathy. So I guess a lot of the questions it raises is like, how do we use advancing medical technology but keep the care in the system? Keep because there's elements about caring for people, the individual holding, the being with someone in those really difficult moments, sitting with someone, sharing their pain and hearing their experience, that's an element of healthcare, I think, that can't be replaced by technology. So I think those two things kind of have to go hand in hand. That, I think advancing medical technology is good, but how we use it is, just as important. And the elements of care that can't be done by, I think there's stuff that can't be done by machines. I think AI is great and technology is great, but I do think there's several specific things, especially around care and holding and empathy, that I don't think can ever be replaced by something that doesn't have a human, a person behind it.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm sure that people involved, on all sides of the medical profession, whether as patients, nurses, doctors, carers, would concur. And that is surely one thing that COVID taught us. One of the most difficult things about COVID, and one of the most troubling and distressing things, was the thought of people dying alone, not holding the hands of their loved ones. And I was reminded of that in the scenes later in the book with Xin Yi. And I would love to talk more about her role in the book as a mother, as a link to family, to history, to Malaysia. Can you talk a bit about that, Grace?
Yeah, I think probably Xin Yi and Tao Yi's relationship was one of the most challenging aspects of the book to write, because it is a challenging and complex relationship. And I wanted to keep it a bit kind of shrouded in unknowns in many ways. Tao Yi feels like she never fully gets a grasp on her mother. And, she tries and tries to understand her mother, but there's something that just slips away throughout all their meetings. It feels like something's not able to be spoken, not able to be asked. And there's a feeling that's there that I wanted to kind of capture in each of their encounters that's a little bit slippery and a little bit shadowy in some ways.
Yeah.
I guess I made a deliberate choice of Grandma, Xin Yi and Tao Yi, the three generations of women. And it was almost like three iterations in a way of a woman of Malaysian Chinese descent. But each of them had a very different course throughout their life. And it almost felt like they sprang from each other quite, so Tao Yi was conceived as a donor baby, and in that future she's conceived in an external womb in a lab. Actually, that's not really sort of discussed a lot in the novel, but that was a deliberate choice on my part.
Yeah.
And I guess the relationship between Xin Yi and Tao Yi it's like they're always trying to move towards each other, but they're sort of pulled away in some ways as well. They can never quite see eye to eye, but they're trying to be alongside each other in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they are both migrants. So they're both born in Malaysia. They're Malaysian Chinese in ethnicity. And when Tao Yi is about 12 years old, they migrate to Australia.
Mm.
And yeah, I guess a few of the things that I was exploring in this story was the feeling of loss in migration, or that's not loss, but also a shift in who you are. So stories that get left behind, and in the case of their family, there were a lot of family stories that she knew no longer wanted to talk about. The traditions and family stories were quite, they kind of just disappeared. And there's, I think, a sadness to that as well. And, you know, when we move into digital spaces, I was thinking about, you know, what are the personal stories, the family stories, the cultural aspects that, you know, once someone of the older generation dies, those memories and those stories are lost. I think that's very, very sad in some ways to lose those family stories. So yeah, in a way, I guess I wanted to kind of honor that as well.
Yeah, and I love the way that you weave themes of identity through the book in ways that are really subtle. You know, there's a lightness of touch. It's just part of lived experience. But sometimes there's a yearning for that kind of lostness, which I found very, very affecting. So before I ask you about uploading, because I think we should talk about that a bit, I want to talk about the lovely playfulness with the language, the vocabulary in this new world that you use. I absolutely loved it, and I found myself writing down
Did you?
words as I went along. People aren't well, they're flash. They mac out, which I think means something like chill out.
Yeah.
School is learn curve, university is capstone. And this was kind of confronting, but totally great. The real world of flesh and blood is Mig world, meat, M-E-A-T, for anyone who didn't catch that. But mixed up in all this playfulness with language is a Chinese term of endearment that Naveen uses when he talks to Tao Yi. How did you come up with all these words? Did they just pop into your head as you wrote? Had you been thinking about this for years? Tell us about the language of this late 21st century world.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm very grateful to my editor, Coco, for letting me keep all the words. I know they can be a bit of a hurdle when a reader comes to a text to find all these new terms, but I had a very lovely editor, so I'm very grateful that those words got to stick around in the book because I think they're a bit of fun. I am a bit of a geek for world building, so I had quite a few, I have quite a few world building documents, and I was just imagining that, you know, in this world 2 generations from now, where borders are much more fluid and people are of mixed heritage, you know, people migrate across borders much more. The language that they use will evolve very quickly. And I just incorporated, I guess, things from different languages here and there. And also some internet slang as well. So meat space internet slang. And there were a few other terms that I think I just grabbed from the internet or from maybe sci-fi shows and just tweaked it a little bit. So it's a real hodgepodge.
Yeah, but it works beautifully. And it felt authentic. You know, to me, it made sense that people would use that language because of their backgrounds, because of their experience. But sometimes it really made me laugh. It was really fun. So thank you to your editor, Coco, and to editors everywhere, actually, for letting all that stay.
Yeah.
It was fun. Yeah. So, all roads do or do not lead to uploading. And this is tricky because we don't want to, spoil endings for readers. But it's so nuanced and provocative and interesting about what it offers and what it might take away. And we've touched on a lot of that as we've gone through this conversation. And I must admit that sometimes I thought, oh, that could never work. Ourselves are so complicated and unpredictable and unique. How could we upload all that organic circuitry and make it digital? But your writing made it very persuasive. So, Grace, I'm interested to know what it was like writing and researching those sections of the book, based on your knowledge of the mind and thinking and thought processes and the self. But also in terms of the plot, did you know from the beginning that uploading would be a theme?
Yes, is the answer to that question.
I thought so.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, yeah. No, I love that question. Thank you. There's a lot in there, but I guess the first thing I can say is that I was very nervous writing about uploading. Like I had the central idea come to me at the very start, the formation of this novel, and then as I was writing, well, why am I writing about mind uploading? So many people have done it, and it's in media, it's on TV. It's such a tricky thing to do well. But yes, actually, one of the earlier titles for this book was Uploading, which was discarded. There were a few titles that we got rid of, but
yeah,
the very first question that came to me when I first thought of the idea for this book was the two characters, Tao Yi and Naveen, and their relationship. So their relationship is the heart of the story, and how things change when uploading a mind into the virtual world, that technology is introduced. So that is, I guess, the central concept of the novel. And I've tongue-in-cheek said that my novel could alternatively be titled How to Stay in Love and Stay Real After Mind Uploading into Virtual Reality. So that's the alternate title for my book. In terms of thinking about the technology, I guess I did a medical degree and I worked for some time training in psychiatry. So I had a lot of opportunities to think about the brain and the mind and then to make stuff up on top of the science.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really geeked out during my university days learning neurology and neuroanatomy. So I guess the structure of the mind and where different functions sit within the brain. And then during my psychiatry training, I suppose it allowed me to think at a higher level about how we construct ourselves. And there was one rotation in particular during my psychiatry training that I was working on this novel, and there was a bit of a collision of ideas in a tertiary hospital, and I was seeing a lot of people with a condition called functional neurological disorder. It's not a very commonly known condition, but in this condition, the hardware of the brain, if you will, the structural anatomy of the brain is fine, but the software of the brain, the way that things fire and connect, is interrupted. And so that kind of bled into the novel in some ways in terms of the analogy between hardware and software. So I started thinking about how a brain is composed of circuits, and how those circuits might be transposed from one physical substrate to another. So if you completely replace all the organic material of the brain, the neurons and the glial cells and all the squishy stuff with digital matter, and you were able to replicate the circuits of the brain with digital substrate, that could plausibly be a way to upload a mind. Yeah, and I was also looking into things like the Human Connectome project, which is a big project to kind of map all the circuits that make up our brains. So yeah, that was a big thing. Yeah, I mean, that was the sort of a nice collision of ideas as I was pondering how this process might work.
Yeah, I think that you pulled off that balance between plot and, something that might be possible and written with a kind of authority really, really very well.
No, the good thing about speculative fiction is if you're not sure, you can make
it up. Yeah. I'm going to ask a couple of maybe quickish questions, but I hope that people start to think about their own questions while we're talking, and you can type them and I will read them out. But perhaps I want to ask you about your practice as a writer. And I know that very often people have asked me, I've heard many people ask, how do you find the time? I mean, you've obviously got a very busy life. You've been working in your medical specialty and, have family responsibilities and all the stuff that life throws at us. How did you find the time to write the book? And how long have you been working on this novel for?
I started writing it in 2018. So that's 4 years before it came.
That's not so long, really.
I guess it's not so long in the book world.
No. Lead times are long.
Yeah. So, and I actually had a little bit of a break from work. So it has always been a bit of a juggle between training in psychiatry and writing. And during, I had a few months break, I sat down and I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a real go. And I started writing a bunch of science fiction short stories. And one of them became this book after many, many rewrites and many iterations, and yeah, a lot of feedback from friends and professionals. So that, 4 years ago was when I started writing this book. How it kind of fits in around other life stuff, it's chaotic. Yeah, there's no, I mean, a lot of every writer has to do it their own way, and your way is going to be different from anyone else's. I don't think there's a prescriptive way to write at all. Some people write every day. I don't write every day. I try to find pockets of time when I can write, and that might be, a couple of times a week. I might try to set aside a few hours to work on something writing related, whether it's research, whether it's answering some emails, or whether it's brainstorming a new story. And that works a bit better for me because I'm not really someone who can jump on a train and, in that 15 minutes, right? I kind of need to sit down and make a coffee and get into the zone a bit more before I can produce something that's semi-coherent. And I guess the other thing I'll say is that I'm acutely aware of, I have help, and I'm acutely aware of the privilege that is required to be a writer. You need time, you need space, and you need money to write. And I'm very grateful to have help from my partner and from other family members, like my parents. And, I have to acknowledge that it's definitely not just me behind making time to write. And I think that's an important acknowledgement to make.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing that. I couldn't agree more. Okay, so one quick final question from me. And it's a question in some ways I feel that I shouldn't even ask, because your book is so thoughtful and nuanced. There's not going to be an easy black or white, straightforward answer. But the ending is really ambiguous. We're not sure where Tao Yi might be in her journey. So I wanted to ask, are you optimistic about our technological future and other kinds of futures as well? There's a lot of love in the book, and I found myself thinking, yeah, she's definitely optimistic, but at times I had my doubts. So are you optimistic about the future?
Oh, I'm going to reveal my dark soul. I'm a bit of a realist or a pessimist at heart, unfortunately. And I think that maybe the book reflects my ambiguity about where we're going in the future. You know, I think that technology is advancing at such a rapid rate that we can't really keep a handle on. And I'm no futurist, I'm no technologist, but the way it impacts us and the way it impacts how we relate to each other can be quite overwhelming a lot of the time. And yeah, as you said, like, things are changing so rapidly. We have ChatGPT coming out now, and that's exciting, but it's also frightening to think about how powerful this technology is, and how many biases it carries in the data sets that it uses. It uses these huge aggregates of data, and it's going to incorporate all the existing biases that we have in our society, like gender biases and racial biases. And that's quite frightening when people are using these technologies already. They're just out there, and they're being used. And I think I'm pessimistic in one way, but I'm also hopeful that we can be more conscious about how we use technologies going forward, and to reflect on, like, how we can use technology for good, to put it simply, to foster more positive, inclusive, hopeful futures that look after each other and look after the environment too.
Yeah,
so I'm ambiguous about the future is the takeaway.
No, I think it's a great answer. I know that people will respond to that and agree that in its, small but very powerful way, your book is advocating for that kind of better future. Now, I am pleased to say that questions are rolling in, and one of them is a question I was going to ask myself, so I'll save that. The first question is whether you've started work on your next book.
Oh, I have in my head. Yes, I have an idea for a second novel brewing in my head. It's been brewing for some months now, and I've started sort of brainstorming and drafting it. Sorry, I haven't started actually writing it yet though. But it's sort of at that stage where all the ideas are fizzing around in my head, and it's the stage where it's good. It's like exciting at this stage. You're like, oh yeah, this is a great idea. And then you sit down and start to write it, and you're like, oh no, it's terrible. What am I doing? So it's at the good stage right now, and I'm just sort of waiting for some space waiting for the ideas to coalesce a bit more, and for some space to sit down and write it. I'm not a speedy writer, but when the ideas kind of hit a certain threshold, I have to get them out. So yeah, it's probably going to be in space.
Yeah. Oh, now with spaceships. But yeah, you've obviously got fans here tonight, so you can do it.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. So there is another question here that I confess was one I thought of asking. And this person says, I'd like to know if, given the opportunity, Grace herself would choose to upload, and why or why not?
Oh, yeah.
Great question, hey?
It is a great question. And actually, quite a few people have asked me this question, and it doesn't get any easier to answer because I feel like I have to think about it again each time. Obviously, the novel reflects my own ambiguities about uploading and virtual reality. There's a part of me in Tao Yi, and there's a part of me in Naveen and their friends as well. I'd love to be as strong as Tao Yi and take, follow her path. But I think I am like Naveen in many ways too. I wonder if I might stay in the physical world for some time, but I think if my loved ones and friends and everything was happening in the virtual world, I would probably succumb and be tempted to join everyone, even if that meant, as the novel explores, am I the same person? And, are you the same person once that process, after that process? And all the questions that come with that.
Yeah, there are many, many, many questions. And also, one of the great questions in literature that so many writers have pursued about immortality. Would we choose to be immortal? What are the trade-offs? I mean, sometimes apparently you have to be a vampire or something, but there are all kinds of trade-offs for immortality. And someone has asked, would you consider writing a sequel?
Yeah, just on
why,
that, immortality was, as I was writing the book, I was like, oh no, they're going to be immortal once they upload. I didn't delve into that a lot in the book, but I think it's a fascinating question, as you said. And I don't think our psyches were built to grapple with immortality. So that's another angle that could potentially be explored in a sequel.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the person asking this, and I can see why, has loved those characters and would like to return to them. So
thank you for the question. Yeah, the ending scene of the book has always been the same throughout all the drafts, from when it was a short story, and then it was a novella, and then it became a novel, and it always finished at that point. And that to me felt quite complete. I was at peace with the way that Tao Yi finished her chapter, and then the next stage of the journey was not part of this book. Although I guess I did see one review, and the reviewer asked, I wonder if Grace would write a sequel, some generations into the future, exploring the communities left behind on Earth and what humanity looks like in Gaia. I thought, gosh, that's a fascinating idea. So maybe one day I'll return to it. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. There's another question here that's kind of along those lines, actually, Grace, where someone says, they ask, good question, how do you think human consciousness and society might evolve in Gaia decades after the ending of the book? So there you go. Someone else is thinking about that.
Yeah, I would love to explore that. I mean, I guess I threw in a few threads of that when Tao Yi was interacting with Naveen, because, the physical limitations in Gaia disappear, and as humans begin to explore the possibilities in Gaia, I think more and more possibilities will open up. So by the end of the novel, bodies can be swapped out, and bodies aren't permanent. You take different shapes, wherever, for different purposes in Gaia. And you can practically teleport. You can go from place to place in an instant. You can manipulate the environment around you. You can manipulate yourself and your own thoughts. So you would become kind of like a little god in this world. And the boundary between yourself and the world would vanish. So it would, I think, yeah, it's probably quite a exciting but also frightening possibilities to explore in this world where everyone.
Yeah, I agree. Super interesting, but maybe not so healthy. Now, we've got some really thoughtful, substantive questions, and I'm really torn between asking you, but how to choose which question. I know that you will be really stimulated by both of them, by all of them. But somebody says, "Hi, Grace. I really appreciated how you integrated those little bits of Asian language. So please, let me try and read these. Uso, Honto, Nani in the dialogue. It really speaks to how the lingua franca within Gaia has incorporated the diverse cultural backgrounds of its inhabitants, even when it's predominantly English-based. Do you think these non-English language and cultural practices can truly survive and flourish in the digital world?" I think it's a great question, where a lot of the digital world to me seems to be quite Anglophone.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating question, a really important and thoughtful question. Thank you for asking that. Gosh, I can only go by my feelings and my own personal thoughts on this. I think that was probably one of the feelings of sadness and loss that I was exploring in the novel as well, that perhaps there is a flattening of culture and a whitewashing of culture as well, as things become more homogenous and kind of, you know, there's a bit of a monoculture that predominates. So I think it is very sad. I mean, in the novel, I explored it more on a personal level, where Tao Yi, it feels her a very personal grief at losing the knowledge of how to write her name in Chinese. I think that is quite sad, I think, to not be able to write your own name, family's mother tongue, and to have no way to recover that. And I spoke a little bit about how she wonders about cultural practices as well that have been lost along the way. So she and her mother have their own family cultural practices, but they're sort of disconnected, and she wonders how they've changed over the years, and how other people practice traditions. And yeah, I think that was a sadness that I was expressing as I was writing the novel, that I also wonder what cultural knowledge have I lost, being a migrant myself. There's so many things I cannot understand about the language of my grandparents, for example, their mother tongue, that I will never be able to understand, just because I have grown up in a different place and don't have those experiences. So I think there definitely is a sadness there, and I'm not sure. But I think concerted efforts would need to be in place to allow non-English languages and cultural practices to truly survive, in answer to your question.
Yeah. So I think we've got a minute to go, and a few people have asked about your own reading, who your favorite speculative fiction authors are. So why don't we, end with what might be a kind of a reading list for some people to press on with.
Yeah, I love reading, as you can see. I've always been in love with books. I love libraries. They are my second home. I try to read, I read speculative fiction and literary fiction and nonfiction. I find that is a lovely combination. The authors who got me a lot into writing short stories and science fiction were Ken Liu and Ted Chiang.
We love it when there are props.
But this is a wonderful collection.
Mm.
Ken Liu and Ted Chiang, who's one of his short stories. So they are just masters, I think, of speculative short fiction. There's so many more. I have to spruik Shelley Parker Chan, who's a Melbourne based fantasy writer as well. Oh gosh, I think
There are some good
go on
links.
and on.
Yeah, there are good
Yeah.
links for people to find in their libraries. And we've come to this, we're beyond the end of this hour. So it's flown by for me. I've loved talking to you. Somebody has just messaged and said, thanks so much, Grace. Brilliant. And I can only agree. Thank you so much for being part of this, Grace. We would all clap madly if we were in the room with you. And thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. Happy reading, happy Library Lovers Day. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Grace.
Thanks for that.